I think I was more on point about the whole Christian being possessed by demons thing than I originally assumed. I started making these videos replying to a comment someone made on a Christian video replying to me when I said it looks like he's possessed, essentially. And they wanted me to go into more detail, and so I decided to do that. And this is before that incest stuff has come out and the chaos that has happened around it. And I was initially just going to make a bunch of videos going through his history and where I think some kind of pathological consciousness or an entity attached itself to him and do all that. But now this has kind of changed things. And I don't want to go into the whole thing too much because it's disgusting. You'll know the story anyway. I am just going to cover the possible demonic aspect of things from a theoretical standpoint with regards to my background in occultism and the Western esoteric tradition. And if you've seen my videos before, you know that I pretty much have assumed that he has been possessed by some kind of entity, and I've used the example of Coronzon 333 as a kind of archetype that fits pretty well with Christian and his behavior. And one day I'll go more into that. But for now, I'm going to go into why, if you're possessed, why would a entity do this kind of thing? What does it gain from it? In voodoo, they in their magical kind of rituals. I've never personally been to one since I don't live in America or Haiti or anywhere near that area, but I know a lot about what happens in these kind of things, and they draw forth some kind of demonic entity within themselves, and when it goes in, you notice that their face starts to change, and they usually want copious amounts of alcohol and drugs, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and they'll give this to sort of appease the demon, and the demon held within the witch doctor or the voodoo practitioner essentially uses that to then get information about the future, since these non-corporeal entities are some, if you want to see it more in the Jungian way, some kind of pathological consciousness that has come out from the unconscious. They are not bound by the this space-time. They're not bound to us space-time. Essentially, they can bring in information from the future, but the majority of the time they lie. They constantly lie. You have to usually force them into telling the truth using various different techniques. And in voodoo, they seem to utilize the alcohol and the drugs and sacrifice of animals and stuff like that to appease the demon that they want to that is being channeled into the individual that they want to get information from. And the interesting thing about this is when the entity leaves the practitioner, they may have drank a liter of rum and done a shitload of coke and marijuana, and then they're completely sober. Their faces go back to normal. The slight distortions that seem to happen, almost an uncanny valley kind of effect that happens when they are drawing in the entity, it goes away. And they're completely sober. And there are a lot of people who can back up this. I'm not just talking shit. And why does this relate to Christian and the allegations of the possible rape and incest with his with his mother. Well, why does the entity that the voodoo practitioner pulls into themselves want things like drugs and other intense kind of psychological rewards, things like violence, killing animals? It's because these things without having a corporeal form, they want to feel and understand what we feel. They want to experience these things, and they want to experience things like sex, they want to experience things like drugs, they want to experience things like fucking people over, and then the sort of psychic rebound of that, the intense release of sensations, of neurochemicals within the brain. They want to experience all of that. And when they do this, they always have to go up to another extreme. And it's like with alcoholics or drug addicts, they get a tolerance. They want to get more, which is why a lot of people, call drug addiction or alcoholism, a personal demon. In a way, it is. It might not be from a external source. However, entities feed off people who are withdrawing also, but they feed off psychic energy and also neurochemical cascades of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. They feed off that stuff. And the more depraved things they do, the more and more they get to high and they get to experience these sensations, which is why the voodoo practitioners feed more and more and more alcohol, give it more marijuana, more cocaine. And hence why when the entity leaves, the person is sober. It's very strange. I can't explain it. There are quite a lot of videos on the internet that you can see, and I know people who've been to some of these things. I'm not that well versed on voodoo or any of that, but I know enough with regards to the kind of occult aspects of it. Now with Chris Chan, the entity going into the entity in Chris, which seems to be a very archetypally like Coronzon 333, which I've mentioned in previous videos. I won't reiterate it and bore people by reading the same quotes from Aleister Crowley and Peter J. Carroll all over again. But look it up on Wikipedia. I'm not saying this entity is the one that is in Chris. I'm saying that its archetype is very similar to the archetype of Chris's behavior and psyche. And essentially, I believe an entity has been in Chris, and I think that it's been draining Chris's psychic energy and using its internet fame and draining all of that, because that's how demons seem to operate. They need to harvest the psychic energy and the neurochemical activity. And Chris Chan, the more and more he becomes withdrawn and isn't noticed and all that, the entity will start to do things to try and push Chris into doing something that will cause more attention to be drawn. Now, when you watch a video of Chris Chan, like with the Sonic Blue Arms thing, and recently the My Little Pony going crazy about it. In my vision, I see, I can't do a good Christian impression, but it's meant to have go to season 14, 5 more seasons, boycott My Little Pony 5, blah, 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 blah. When you watch that, it's draining your psychic energy into the entity that's in Chris. It is feeding off that because it is feeding off your projections. And by God, whatever demon was in Chris has been insatiable. The incest thing alone is depraved enough to give a massive rush to the demon. However, I don't think the act of incest itself was what the particular aim of whatever entity has been attached to Chris for a while now wanted. I think that was a step towards the real rush that the demon intended to harvest. And that was the absolute chaos of when all this stuff came out. And how did it come out? Christian just told everybody, essentially, with absolutely no shame. Caused an absolute sensation. And all of you got sucked into it. And this entity has been feeding, it's just in a feeding frenzy from all the media, the hype, all these people who don't know shit about Christian, who've all of a sudden making videos about him since this happened. Even if, take away the whole entity idea, even as a person, if you did something like that and were caught out and you were arrested, and the immediate attention from that, you would get an insane rush of neurochemicals. It would be a hit like doing extremely pure cocaine. And you can have negative reactions to that too, or positive. It depends on your mindset and what's going on. It would be immense. I can't imagine the type of feeling and sensation which these things leech off of that Christian has been experiencing since being exposed. Now, that is what I think the pathological consciousness attached to Chris wanted. Not so much the incest, which was a rush within itself for the entity, but for the massive attention worldwide that it's going to get after it confessed and admitted to what it had done. And everyone has been sucked into it. The amount of psychic energy this thing has leached off of everybody is unbelievable. I've never seen anything quite like this. Now, like with another case I've talked about before in a sort of radio podcast thing I made that I'll redo one day and do it properly. I talked about the case of a murderer called Harvey Church, and he stated, "I won't be here for my execution," essentially after he was caught. And he went unconscious. They had to hold him up on a chair, tie him up, put him on the door that drops when you hang somebody, and then hang him, and the chair smashed down and his neck was broken. And he was in a comatose, catatonic kind of state for months. They had to force feed him. He just would not be conscious because whatever entity was in Harvey Church had left after it had sucked and drained all the energy and left whatever remained of Harvey Church. And it was not there for the execution. And this is what's probably going to happen to Chris. After all this blows over and calms down, and the psychic storm that this thing is feeding off of ends, the entity will probably detach itself from Chris if it can, and then yeah, Chris is done. And I know this sounds very strange, and you know, I get a little bit of shit for making these videos because of the kind of strange perspective I'm giving, and that's all this is a perspective. And I am very surprised at the timing of all this with this happening, and I do feel that I was on point when I began to make these videos. And the last one I made came out, I think it was like a day before all this exploded. And essentially this entity has fed off all of us, has drained energy off all of us, because we were all sucked in. And yeah, it's a tragic situation, and I don't even know what to say other than that. But I just thought I'd give my perspective on a kind of part 3 to the Christian demonic possession possibility. Anyway, thank you for watching. Have a good day.